guys all set? Greg's good. Mark's good. Good evening. I'll call the Lisbon Town Council's meeting for Tuesday, June 30th, 2015 to order. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item, please.
Yes, roll call. Councilor Garrison.
Present.
Councilor Lunt.
Here.
Councilor McTevier.
Here.
Councilor Bickford.
Here.
Councilor Crafts.
Here.
Councilor Pesky.
Here.
Councilor Brunel.
Here.
Before we move on into a couple of housekeeping things, after the last airing of the council meeting, I had a resident call and state that when the council has discussion and then a motion is made and we're not all on the same page, sometimes it's confusing what the motion is. So what I ask for the council is when we go forward, make a motion, state exactly out, what you want your motion to be, so that it's very clear for the audience and people in the public of what that motion is, so there's no question. With that being said, next item, please.
Is good news and recognition.
Open the floor for any good news and recognition. Just want to thank the Moxie Committee for all their hard work that they're putting into the festival coming up. Tracy's been here late, and the committee members have been working hard, so I appreciate all the hard work that everybody's put into it. Anything else? See none? Next item, please.
Is audience participation and a response for agenda items.
Open audience participation for agenda items only. Ms. Fitzgerald.
Dorothy Fitzgerald, 6 School Street, Lisbon Falls. Wondering how much our taxes are going up this year.
Thank you. Anybody else? See none. Ms. Fitzgerald, don't know how to answer your question. Neither budget has passed, and we're still in the process. Next item, please.
Is the consent agenda. Any councilor wishing to have any item removed may do so now. Items removed from the consent agenda will be considered next. Order 2015-178 to approve the sewer commitment as presented.
Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the motion to approve the sewer commitment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Order passed 7-0.
And the next item, please.
Under council orders, resolutions, and ordinances, Order 2015-179, the town manager's contract.
I'm actually going to jump down to 8, and we'll do the A police study presentation first. We'll move that out of order so Mr. Pardue can
Okay.
get along his process for the evening.
All right. So, police personnel study presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And first and foremost, I wish to, on behalf of my company, thank all of you, the council, the town manager, and certainly Chief Brooks and the members of the department for their support in this process, for making themselves available at all times, and for placing your confidence in me and my firm to be able to do this study. As we go through this, there'll be certainly some things that I talk about that may not sit well with some and will sit well with others, and that's recognized within a study. Our approach, I'll outline, and then I will go through what is ultimately about a 31 or 32 page report, but I will go through it and hitting in just some of the highlights. The approach was an initial meeting with the town manager and the police chief. I did meet with some staff, both past and present, met with certain residents in town, and they were just randomly selected. And we reviewed the policing philosophy of the Lisbon Police Department. And in that, what we identified is that the department is very committed to community policing. There are concerns about the department trying to keep up with the challenges that are facing law enforcement, not only in Maine but across the country, with an increased number of calls for service impacting many communities, to include Lisbon. I'll go through and just highlight some of the process and some of the following things that we found. Highly committed to providing high levels of service to the community, comprised of dedicated personnel that enjoy providing law enforcement services to the community, appears to be appropriately organized to address community issues to meet the town law enforcement expectations. It is struggling to maintain a high level of service that they currently provide, as is expected by the community due to a recent loss of staff positions and a growing increase in calls for service. I say that because in the first half of 2015, I saw a 17.25% increase in the calls for service in compared to the same time period in 2014. When I'm comparing 2013 to 2014, there was a 5% increase in calls for service. So that's a trend that seems to be continuing, and certainly a bump of 17.25% in the first 6 months of this year, really the first 5 months or so of this year, is concerning. But that may be indicative of some of the economic times that we all currently are experiencing. And that makes your job even harder as we talk about law enforcement services and the need for police officers and the duties and responsibilities they're charged with. And you're working with a very defined, like every community, difficult budget. I appreciate how hard that can be. I have the luxury of looking at your police department without really the financial and fiscal constraints that you all have to try to balance for these people that are behind me and for all your residents. The patrol supervisor sergeant position that is currently vacant is, in my opinion, quite essential. As we drilled down into the duties and responsibilities that that person was responsible for, we found that those were vast. They were quite extensive. I won't go into all the details of what they were doing, but I can say that many of those duties I would encourage the police department to look at and see if some of those can be offloaded and shifted over to the lieutenant. Many of the duties they were doing would be at more of a lieutenant level, and also sharing in those services with the other sergeant. However, that creates a little bit of a challenge because the other sergeant, if you would, is funded 50% through communications, 50% through patrol. They're responsible for your IT, your information technology within the department. They serve as the communications supervisor, and they're also responsible for patrol functions. That's a big load for anyone to handle. You'll see in one of my recommendations that you are, at least for your consideration, and again, I recognize you are working with very restrictive budgets, but as you vision forward, I would encourage that you think about whether there's a way to civilianize your IT needs within the police department, allowing for the current sergeant who's performing those duties to focus more on sworn law enforcement needs. That's another way to do that. The detective division is currently with one detective. I recognize in the years past there were 3. That went down to 2, and Detective McAllister retired, leaving you with 1. In my recommendation, I urge that you consider filling that vacancy that is currently in the detective position for the mere reason that one detective trying to handle a caseload that they currently handle and the intricate cases that we're faced with in law enforcement today is really very challenging. And you normally would think patrol officers could do their own investigations, but when you look at the shifts that they work and the fact that people are at work and not available much of the time, they get into an investigation, they're called away to handle a call for service. That makes it extremely challenging, and certainly one would argue that the quality of service that they would be providing to the residents who need investigative assistance would certainly be suspect, versus having 2 people who are balancing the caseload of investigations. Just only imagine that you had a child who was abused in some fashion, and the amount of work and the relationships and effort that have to take place with state and federal agencies, and the amount of work that has to take place, that can't be investigative work that takes place 15 minutes here and 30 minutes here. there has to be a clear focus to provide the level of service that your community and your police department has committed to. Ultimately, how you staff and how you go forward with, be it a sergeant, a detective, within the communications center, ultimately becomes a policy decision. There is no magic number on how do we use a population ratio to officer ratio to identify the number of personnel within the police department you should have. There's a lot of times we'll see a 1.9 officers per 1,000 population. A lot of times that's touted, which for you would equate to about 17 officers. I would argue that that's not a fair analysis. If it was, that would be very simple. But every community is different. You are different than your neighboring communities. Your policing needs are different. They may not be, obviously, to the level that you might find in Lewiston. They may be greater than what you might have in one of the other neighboring communities. And so it becomes a policy decision on how you use your law enforcement services. And I go through the report, and I'll talk about the utilization of reserve officers trained to an appropriate level is a significant economical asset to the department. They are in concert with full-time staff and should be utilized to the extent possible, recognizing too, though, that they need to be well-trained. And it's not their full-time job. And I would encourage that reserve officers or less experienced officers have a level of supervision provided them, and that they're not working alone or solo, particularly in the overnight shifts. That puts them in a very difficult position and exposes you and your community to liability. I understand there, at least, I don't know if it's been approved or adopted, but there might be an 800-hour of reserve officer time consideration for reduction. I would encourage that you reconsider that to see if that may be a method that you can fund to aid in providing the law enforcement services that this community seems to embrace and need. I moved over to the Communications Center and recognize that they're responsible to provide dispatch for the town of Bowdoin's animal control and emergency medical service, and on occasion you dispatch for units on bordering towns of Topsom and Lewiston. And I go through some of the efforts that take place within that center and recognize that the patrol sergeant is, as I referenced earlier, is responsible for the oversight of that entity. You'll find in the report, and again, a recommendation for your consideration, and again, for your visioning process over the next year, 3 years, 5 years, that you look for what is the potential of having a dispatch supervisor that is a professional committed to that role and function. And I say that because your personnel need management oversight in communications as much as they do on the street in law enforcement. At the same time, you are handling calls for service and responsible to several other communities. And so if they have a concern how something is done or they have a complaint, they need to have a center point or a focal point to bring those concerns to, so that those are vetted appropriately and investigated. I'm assuming that you are receiving compensation from those communities for your services, and that might be an expectation that they would look for. I will talk very briefly about our scope and methodology and how we went about this approach. We reviewed the current staffing allocation and deployment practices, reviewed current staffing goals and scheduling practices. We reviewed the goals and objectives of the Lisbon Police Department command staff relating to the staffing and meeting community expectations for levels of service. And again, recognizing there are times, and I hesitate to say this, but I suspect it's known throughout the community, there are times you have a lone officer on duty. You can't cut their expectations any further for your citizens. We reviewed the current population demographic data, recognizing that just outside there are 16,000 cars a day that pass through the community, traveling off the turnpike or going to 295 or coming out of Lewiston. And so that's a significant number of cars and potential for accidents, which you obviously do experience. We reviewed the overall active or reactive workload of the police department. That's very important to note as reactive, and I'll talk a little bit about unobligated time as we go forward. Calls for service typically are what we would entitle reactive time, when a citizen calls for and is in need of help, we respond. That's reactive. We reviewed the calls of service and the nature over the past 2 years. We did find many positive findings, as I've already outlined. I won't go through the demographics and characteristics of your community because you know them far better than I do. So I move over on page 7. We talk about determining the right, in quotes, size of a police department. Depends on the examination of the agency's workload, and certainly policy decisions made by the leadership of the community to include the chief of police. In considering the staffing of any police agency, there are certainly many critical considerations that we look at. And I've outlined a lot of what those are. And those considerations will shape the department and the quality and efficiency for the service that it delivers. For the citizens, as I'll outline some of the considerations that departments take into account when they determine how to utilize staff and what proper staffing levels are. There are administrative duties and responsibilities that you must prepare and be able to supply, which includes records, court proceedings, the handling of evidence, the manner that patrol spends its time. There's a desired mixture of calls for service. How do you balance that? And what we found is that there is dedicated time of response calls for service within your community that is somewhere in the 60 to 70% range. And so that would suggest that somewhere between 30 and 40% is undedicated or unobligated time. That's not out of the norm whatsoever, particularly as we talk about community policing. How do we utilize, and how does the administration choose to utilize that 30 or 40%? And the first thing you think of, well, there's the gap. There's how we can fill, and we don't need those personnel. But you have a community policing philosophy in which the citizens, the business owners, appreciate interaction by and with your police department. And so much of that time is consumed in that type of activity, but also in follow-up investigations. Remember, that's not a dedicated effort. Calls for service are reactive. The amount of self-directed, self-initiated patrol time afforded personnel also falls under patrol. The amount of community education. I noticed when I first came to visit here that you were hosting a Citizens Police Academy. Some of the areas where community education comes into play, and that's terribly important to most communities, crime prevention education, awareness, substance abuse education, particularly as we focus and address prescription drug challenges that are being experienced across the country. Cybercrime. Cybercrime is on the rise, as you know, and it's being experienced, and those take voluminous amounts of time for investigation. So that leads me back to the detective unit and officers trying to do the best they can in their follow-up work. Youth education, bullying, we hear about it all the time within our schools, and I certainly applaud the work of your 2 school resource officers. They seem to be doing a tremendous job in their interaction within their respective schools in those grade levels. Bicycle safety, as simple as that may sound, folks enjoy bicycle safety for their kids, the use of helmets, and that keeps our young folks on bicycles safe so that we aren't faced with tragedy and having to do very serious investigations. Senior citizen education, we read every day about Maine is an aging population and perhaps one of the oldest states in the nation, as I recall. We're seeing all the time scams that are targeting the elderly. Again, work that is done by not only patrol and your detectives, but by the chief and the lieutenant and the sergeants. That's incumbent upon every member in the organization is to work with our elderly to try to protect them against things such as scams, helping them with personnel or personal security. I don't know if you have a SALT program, and that's seniors and law enforcement together. That's a program that's very, very effective in many parts of the country, and one that you may wish to consider, and that's building partnerships with your senior citizen population. Other things, the Citizen Police Academy, also citizen ride-along programs to help the citizens understand more the challenges that law enforcement faces and get to know the good men and women that provide the service within your community on a one-to-one basis as you spend time in the confines of a very small car in these days. Volunteers in policing, VIPS is a very effective program in helping offset some of the needs within the department. There are many people who like to spend time volunteering, and these are models that are effective in Maine and across the country, and one that I would urge that be considered as well. And then you may host a public safety day. My point being, there are so many demands, so many draws, and so many expectations by citizens that these are just a small sampling of many of which your department offers and many more which they may wish to offer. Traffic control and enforcement draws on time, the level of investigative effort desired to solve crimes and provide service to victims versus being report takers. It's really important when your home, your business is burglarized or a loved one is somehow assaulted or offended, that somebody doesn't come in and just take a report. They really give it the time, the dedication, the commitment, the interest to try to solve that crime through a level of compassion and caring. That doesn't happen in 10 minutes when you go in, just take a report and you're out the door. And sometimes that's what's happening in Lisbon as well as in other communities because the other demands on service are impacting law enforcement. So I highlight it's most important that the critical considerations shown above and that I just spoke to are considered, as well as the amount of externally generated workload, internally generated or discretionary workload, and the need to provide administrative support and operational units. I won't go through in great detail. I realize you're on a tight agenda tonight, but I do break those down in the report for those that wish to read that later. Police services that essentially create their own work include narcotics, works within the narcotics unit or within the officers that might be assigned to Maine Drug Enforcement or other efforts. Cybercrime units, school resource officers, although they do respond to calls that are off at the school campus many times to try to take the workload off of a unit that may be further away. And special assignment units, sometimes there are OUI patrols or speed enforcement patrols, and those usually generate or self-initiated efforts. Patrol staffing, I'll go through very briefly about how calls for service and where they come from, and they come into your communications center through 911 or non-emergency lines, and that's a person making a request for officer presence or assistance, or perhaps someone on the side of the road hailing an officer down. That we equate to a call for service. Self-initiated activity or somewhat what I just spoke about, and then there are the administrative tasks that we outline. The Lisbon Police Department has not formally adopted a means to track unobligated time, and that's one of the things that I do encourage that they look at is how do we identify that 30 or 40% unobligated time I spoke of earlier to say, can that be more effectively utilized, or are we on the mark with that? But I encourage that we always look to say if we have time that's not dedicated, can it be more effectively used? And that will require the administration to drill down just a little bit on that. The approach requires patrol officers to carry on an investigative caseload, which further limits their availability for calls for service. And I cite in Lisbon, out of sheer necessity, patrol officers are required to conduct investigative follow-up, although that's not easily done for the reasons I spoke about because of the shift work and the interruptions that occur. Investigations, no different than patrol, as we try to figure out what the right size is, and that becomes a policy decision and a service decision within that. I cite the department's encouraged to develop a system that better tracks the workload of the detective division. They need to really try to capture what the detectives are doing, the magnitude of those cases, the caseload that's being handled by the year, by the month, by the day, and by the hour. We do that a lot for calls for service, and they've been tremendous in providing that data, which we've culled through for a long time now. And so that we're able to, as they can, identify where the biggest demands are for your patrol staff. I would encourage you to do the same for CID, Criminal Investigation Division, so that perhaps those shifts can be staggered in some fashion. We're seeing communities that have 2 detectives. Oftentimes, instead of working a Monday through Friday, you may have a Tuesday through Saturday and a Monday through Friday. So there's some overlap, plus it moves into a weekend time so that those folks that are working Monday through Friday and have a need for investigative assistance, they're home on Saturday, so it's not impacting their ability to earn an income. Supervisory accountability and liability. We've already spoken about the fact that there are 2 sergeants. One is really committed to IT and communications, and when he has some time, he's able to provide oversight to your patrol function. the lieutenant is providing a fair amount of oversight and availability and supervision to many of your evening shift hours. The other sergeant that is currently, I believe, still vacant, I think is critical, once again, for that supervisory oversight and the liability that comes with failure to supervise. We know about vicarious liability and our exposure to that, and that's even worse when we're not present, but we have an obligation to have provided liability or supervision. Providing supervision guidance is, to me, imperative to make sure that officers are given the support and guidance they need when they're making very hard split-second decisions on the street. I go into span of control and number of subordinates. I won't drill down in that tonight. And we reference some numbers that FEMA offers within that from the 1950s to current date. And technology has opened up the span of control so that it's more of a 15 to 1. But again, remember, these are folks that are on the ground. You have one officer working, and I'm not saying you need 1 to 1 by any means, but you do need to have some additional oversight. In a large-scale emergency management event is what FEMA talks about. So if you had 80 people on the ground because of a plane crash or a major weather issue or something, that's how they talk about a 15 to 1 or a 6 to 1 ratio as you read through that. Training, I'll just hit some of the highlights. I said in Lisbon we found numerous occasions where a reserve officer was working with no supervisor on duty. We encourage that the scheduling and staffing of shifts take into consideration the importance of providing those less experienced a level of supervision. We go through the importance of training and education, professional development, to include the reserve officers so that you are putting highly qualified individuals on the road, even if they are working in a part-time capacity. They're still performing the same duties as your full-time members are. We encourage the administration to carefully evaluate the scheduling of supervisory and highly experienced personnel so that they are present to safeguard the less experienced personnel working without guidance and supervision. And so that may be a realignment of the supervisors that they are afforded to perhaps carry over until 2 a.m. So that during the busiest times of the overnight shift, which oftentimes may be 11 p.m. to 2 a.m., there is an additional bit of oversight because those that are working evenings are scheduled a little bit later. They come in a little bit later. I move over into the organizational overview of the department. 1 chief, 1 lieutenant, 2 sergeants, 2 school resource officers, 6 patrol officers. You'll note an asterisk next to that. 4 communication staff, and I understand now 7 part-time reserve dispatchers as opposed to 8 because 1 moved into a full-time position, leaving a vacancy. And the asterisk really denotes the fact that there are some who would argue that the department has 8 full-time patrol officers and that 2 of them are merely assigned to the school resource position. And that's a fair argument, except if you really look at it, those 2 officers are able to provide about 25% of their time, typically over the summer, back to the department for patrol support. Of that 25%, like most of us, they look to take some vacation time during the summer. And so on average, between them, about 4 to 5 weeks of vacation, really leaving their availability to be about 9 weeks out of a 52-week period to augment or supplement the patrol force. So it's a little bit of a misnomer if you were to look and say, well, we've got 8. But that's really not accurate if you drill down into that. I go through and talk about the duties and responsibilities of each position within the department. And which takes a few pages. And then we did a comparison of a couple of departments that we felt were fairly close, and I chose these departments. Someone would argue, well, they're not even in our county, and that's an accurate statement. However, I do know these departments, and I know that they have a very similar community policing philosophy. But as we looked at the Lisbon Communications Center first, we broke down the number of calls that take place that they handle for Lisbon, Sabattis, Durham, Greene, Bowdoin, Lewiston, and Topsom. looking at both 2014 and 2013, and you'll see in most cases, we're seeing a rise. Sabatis, for example, in 2013, 3,391 calls for service that came through, and yet in 2014, 4,158. It's a significant increase, which puts a significant demand on your communications center that's really important to track. Lisbon went from 9,291 to 9,738, and are certainly on pace to be well over 10,000 if the trend continues that we're seeing today for 2015. In our comparison departments, we looked and asked for information regarding their authorized sworn member strength, geographical square mileage of their jurisdiction, the population, and the total number of calls for service. I selected Gorham, Yarmouth, Kennebunk, and Lisbon. We obviously use Lisbon as a comparison. And again, it's because I know these chiefs, and I know that their community policing philosophy is very similar to that of Chief Brooks. And if you go through, I can't make an argument that your 14 is not an adequate number. That's not out of line with other communities. And there's actually a kind of a statistical calculation that you do when you find that they fall into place very similar to Yarmouth in their situation. So I'm not advocating at all that you need to add to your staff. I think it's very important that you try to keep your staff at the current levels that it was, I guess, last year before some of the cuts that are being considered or have been implemented. You'll look on page 25, the rank structure of each of those comps, and they're not dissimilar in most cases. We're seeing in Gorham they have 3 detectives, a detective sergeant and 2 detectives, and 14 patrol officers. They're a little busier by 4,000 calls for service than your department. Yarmouth uses 2 sergeants, 1 detective, and 8 patrol officers. And again, my recommendation is that there be 2 detectives within the Lisbon Police Department. We don't take into account within that table the SROs. We know that they're accounted for, but we don't drill down into that because those assignments can change anytime. So in the conclusion, what I cite is it's clear from our analysis that you folks employ a highly dedicated group of individuals to provide a high level of police service to the community. And there are critics of the police department. There are critics of the police department in every community. When law enforcement has to take someone from their home or deprive them of their ability and freedoms, oftentimes they're not always touted as friends. And so there will be critics. And there are certainly areas for improvement within the department. But the vast majority of those that we spoke with spoke very highly of the department and their commitment and the men and women that comprise that department. So I think that's very important, and I will talk very quickly on their recommendations. That the current vacant patrol supervisor position be staffed, the current vacant detective position be staffed, the recent reduction of reserve officer patrol time be reinstated. Due to the decreased number of staff assigned to the Criminal Investigation Division, the lieutenant is recommended that he institute additional management approaches to include the establishment of tighter guidelines, regular staff meetings, and one-on-one reviews of caseloads and approaches. And that's not to suggest that that's not happening. We're only recommending that real focus on that to try to tighten that up to make sure that that unit's working as effectively and efficiently as it possibly can. The use of unobligated time be reviewed to ensure the time is being spent in a proactive manner and that people aren't waiting 30 or 40% of the time for that next call, but that time is being utilized to serve the citizens the most effective way they can. The current staffing levels of officers in the patrol division be maintained and reevaluated after the unobligated time is being used to its maximum potential. At that point, the chief and his command staff may come back to you and say, we're hitting on more chords than we ever have before, and we're very comfortable with where we're at, or we think we can do without one position because we're working more effectively. And I think there has to be the charge and trust that that analysis takes place within the department. The work that the department work toward further enhancing the delivery of patrol services, ensuring the lieutenant and sergeants are taking a highly active role in overseeing and directing daily operations. Again, not to suggest that's not happening, only that you make sure that we pay great attention to that and tweak that to its ultimate ability. The town considered converting the information technology work of the department, being that sergeant I referenced, to a civilian position, allowing sworn personnel to dedicate their time to law enforcement functions. Officers go and you spend a tremendous amount of money and time on training officers, and particularly someone that's at the rank of sergeant and above. They've been around a long time. They have an awful lot to offer. They may be saving you some money by doing the IT function, but in the long run, I would suggest that you evaluate that because it may be costing you more money than you realize by limiting what their work and service is to the police department. And it finally, and I skimmed over it a little bit, as you vision about your communications center, and if that remains in place for years to come, that you look for a communications supervisor, and that's their primary function. They certainly would do quality assurance analysis, making sure that dispatchers are doing all the right things, that they're contemporary in their approach, that equipment's maintained, and that relationships with those entities that you serve are fostered, and so that the fees that I believe you charge, people are comfortable with that, knowing that they're getting something for their dollar out of that. I will tell you very quickly a little of my background. It's almost 40 years now of work experience, I guess. Most of that has been in the municipal sector. I've served as a town manager, a town administrator, a police chief, a fire chief, a public safety director, and a public services director on an interim role, which was quite an experience. My point of sharing that with you is I understand through your eyes the challenges that you're faced with. I understand from Chief Brooks's position the challenges that he and you were faced with. And I appreciate, as a tax-paying citizen, the challenges we're all faced with trying to provide the very best service in the most economical way we can. And I just encourage that you look at this. It gives you ideas on how to streamline your operation, but keep it safe and keep it effective. And to work in partnership, and I think it's so vital that your law enforcement and public safety entities work closely with the manager and work closely with the council, because ultimately you're all serving the same people, and those are the folks behind me and viewing. And when those relationships are not strong, the citizens lose. And so I just would encourage that you look at that. I am privileged to be here tonight, and I thank you all for the opportunity. And I do hope that we make a difference in what we've gone through. We've gone through a voluminous amount of data. And to come out and say to you, well, you need to refill this, you need to refill that, again, I have the luxury of not spending my money for that. But I also feel I have an obligation to really report from my professional eyes what I think is best for your community. And maybe you can't do it all at once, but I ask that you use that as a springboard for the future, if not tonight. Any questions I can answer for you?
Any council questions? Anything over here? I have several questions, but first I just want to thank you for putting together a report of such. I was a little anxious waiting to review this. It's been a long time in the
Absolutely.
workings. So I appreciate your staff working hard on this, and also the police department working with you to provide the documentation that you need to make this assessment. You know, as you noted, you looked at it from a perspective of not having to pay that bill.
Of course.
So from my understanding, you took an approach of how to maintain the same level of service when you did a review of the police department. Is that correct?
Yeah, I won't say I took that approach. I really went into it with no preconceived notion whatsoever. I went into it to say, what are the services that your community seems to expect, that you have embraced as the government body, that the police department has embraced? What's been working? And what I saw was it's working, it's getting by. but I am concerned with some of the fiscal challenges you're faced with in some of the areas that I know you've spoken about having to reduce within the police department, and only encourage that at the level that it was functioning previously, and I'll go back before the fiscal discussions of recent time, it seemed to be meeting the mark. Is there always room for additional officers to provide greater service? Absolutely. But that's not reality. And so I would say that as you try to balance your budget, that you take into great consideration the importance of the supervisory position, the detective position, and the, if you would, the bang for your buck that you get with your reserve officers, because they really are a less expensive way to provide service to your community, recognizing that they don't have the extensive experience that your full-time staff would.
My next question or topic is, you mentioned a 30 to 40% of time that is undedicated time.
Right, unobligated.
Unobligated,
Sure.
thank you. So, from my understanding, from your saying, is that 30 to 40% of our officers' time on the road, they are not obligated to do something, is that correct?
That's right. As we look at it, and oftentimes the mark is closer to 40% nationally of unobligated time. You are somewhere in the 30 to 40% range of unobligated time. That's meaning that if they came in for their, let's call it a 10-hour shift, that 30% of that or so, maybe 3 hours, is not running from call to call to call. So that's assuming then that they don't have an investigation, they don't have an accident, or if that accident that they take, if the punch card, if in essence they're cleared from that call, but they're still working on the report, that's unobligated time, or it's really dedicated time that shows as unobligated. And so there's a lot of flex in there. But statistically, you would show that you have 30 to 40% of time that's not obligated. Now, what does one do with unobligated time? Traffic enforcement, community interaction, going over to the schools, going to a senior center, and so that becomes the time used for community policing and interaction, or patrol, or building checks, home checks, other things that become self-initiated. And that's what I encourage you to look at from the unobligated time. How much of that unobligated time are we really using? And it's important that officers document that they're using that time, otherwise it shows as unobligated. And I would argue, just from my experience in law enforcement agencies, that your unobligated is probably not 30 to 40%. People are on traffic enforcement, and that's downtime as you're waiting for that speeding car, but your presence is having an impact on the motoring public in a good way. So you're not getting credit for obligated time, but you really are providing a service.
Could you go into a little detail of how you calculated Lisbon's unobligated time?
We went through all the calls for service for 2013 and 14, and we looked at the officers' amount of time that they have available just on their 2,080-hour work schedule, if you would, taking it and then calculating out their vacation and sick time and use of time, and saying, okay, how much time do they really have that they're present at work, and then what are the calls for service that they were dispatched to and that they handled and were identified as obligated. And so it's that analysis that it goes through.
Okay.
We know that people have at least 2 weeks vacation, and many times it's 3, 4, or longer. You have a somewhat seasoned staff. And so that comes off of that 52-week period, and you do those calculations downward.
Okay. Let's see. My other question I had was going over to CID. You had mentioned, or you recommend we have a better way of tracking the workload, caseload. So I'm interested to know how you came to a conclusion, with a recommendation we need to implement a better process of tracking, but also making a recommendation to fill now a vacant CID position. So if you could give a little light on that.
Absolutely. Again, going back to your calls for service, and we break those are broken down as far as category and nature of call, and then you use your Uniform Crime Reporting Statistics, we call them UCRs, and so then you can identify the nature and severity of the call. And again, from experience, we know that burglaries, assaults, sexual assaults, those types of calls are not calls that take 10 minutes. They can take hours, they can take weeks or months. And so we looked at that and said the nature and severity of those calls would identify the fact that your CID personnel, or person in this case, is inundated with very serious calls. And patrol, again, can't follow up on many, they can follow up sometimes on burglary, but crimes that are a little more static. But if you have a victim, a crime against person, to go out and try to spend a couple of hours with that person interviewing and following up on witnesses in uniform, in your patrol time, in your patrol vehicle, it's not an effective way to combat crime and to bring resolution to a very serious offense.
My last question I have goes back to page 11 of your report. You mentioned the definition of calls for service, and then on page 23 you have you stated this was 9,738 calls for service. Excuse me, 24 in 2014. So I think sometimes there's a lot of confusion in the public of exactly what a calls for service means. And here you have a definition of somebody calling either for a 911 emergency, on 911 for an emergency, or a non-emergency call. So I'm interested in this 9,738 number. Did the phone actually ring that many times over there for a call, or does that also include non-obligated time, such as traffic stops and building checks as well?
We don't have the statistics of how often the phone rings or has rung.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, it's usually 3 times, and that's a very ballpark estimate. I know in my experience, I worked with an agency where we had just over 30,000 calls for service, and our phones we did track, and we were over 100,000 telephone calls that were fielded by dispatch personnel. So I only can use that as a guide and not an absolute at all. But I would suggest that your phone is probably ringing in the 27 to 30,000 times annually. But again, that's a guess.
I think maybe I confused my question a little bit. I'll reword it. You have stated we have 9,738 calls for service in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, do we have 9,738 calls for service from members of the community or passing through motorists alone, or does that 9,700 include traffic stops, building checks, non-obligated time?
It would be the latter.
Okay, so it includes everything that is done.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions that I have. I appreciate you taking the time to answer my questions.
Absolutely, thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions from council before we move on? See none, on behalf of the council, I appreciate you doing this research for us and providing us with a wonderful presentation.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank all of you.
All right. Madam Clerk, we'll back to 2015-179, please.
Yes, the town manager's contract.
As we have discussed in executive session, the contract has been altered or should I say, to reflect our discussion, and this is just a vote to sign the contract this evening. I'd open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the motion to approve the new town manager's contract.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Greg? No? All those in favor?
Order passed, 7-0.
Thank you, Diane. And the next item, please.
Order 2015-180, banner policy.
Diane or Tracy?
I'll have Tracy. We did include in front of you an amended version of the banner policy based on some comments from Councilor Garrison. And then also Tracy and I went through it and we made a couple of tweaks to it. So the one in front of you is the most recent.
And it should say down the bottom, revised 6/30/15.
Do you want to go over the changes compared to last time, please?
Sure. Basically, we went, changed the process to banner permit policy instructions. As you go down through, number 1, we included, added the comment of application must be submitted to the town's clerk office and is on a first-come, first-served basis. So then that way, if whomever gets their application and their fee, and they would have first priority on the dates that they were looking for. When we looked at number 2, no banners will be approved for longer than 2 7-day periods for a total of 14 days unless prior approval by the town manager. And then we'd also be looking at the Director of Public Works, along with the town manager, may approve or deny banner applications outside of the established banner season. The reason for that, if there's a question, is because you're dealing with weather. So the last thing you want to do is put something up there, and if there's a storm or something that can cause a banner to kind of let go and cause hazard. And number 3, it was just a matter of changing the sizing. So the minimum of 16 feet long by 3.5 feet wide, and a maximum of 30 feet long by 4 feet wide. The cables that are across there that Fairpoint put up are basically 4 feet. So 3.5, you get a little bit of flexibility by the time that you put the anchors on there. So Public Works would be able to make that fit for 3.5. And for those who may already have a banner, you know, as you can see, the one up there now is the Moxie Festival, and that is about 3.5 feet. We took out on number 3, the last one, the Director of Public Works has the right to approve or deny any deviation of the banner size. We already made noted, thank you, Councilor Garrison, within number 3 on the size. So we're already saying what the minimum and maximum is in that regard. Number 4, we kept the same. 5, again, dealing with the extension of the time period, looking for prior approval by the town manager. We added number 6 for those who are looking to extend the banner for being up 14 days. This is in reference to what I brought to your attention for like the Moxie concert that goes on all summer long, and being able to have the banner up longer than the 14 days. So number 1 must be approved by the town manager with advance notice. 2, if a different organization's application is received during the approved extended period, that request would take priority over the first request for a period of up to 14 days. Again, allowing another organization to put up their banner and the other one come down. And there will be a $100 charge each time Public Works reinstalls the same banner during an approved extended period of time, e.g. considering, you know, the summer concerts in the park. Pretty much that's all we have right now that goes longer than a couple of weeks. Down at the bottom of that, we took out note, the town is not responsible for any lost, stolen, or damaged banners. All banners are installed and removed on Mondays unless inclement weather. We made that number 11, so we made it its own number. And then on number 10, we change it from the applicant will be responsible for picking up their banner within 1 week of the removal. Banners will not be retained after that time period. I know, Councilor Garrison, you had mentioned something about the opportunity if they don't pick it up during a certain time period that it can be discarded too. So, but when Diane and I had gone over it, that was one we didn't change. That is all as far as for the process for the application. Well, the next one is the application. Under the banner permit application, as you can see where it's dates requested, again, maximum of 2-week period, 14 days total per request, unless prior approval by the town manager. This is see item 6 on the banner permit process instruction. I guess we're going to change that to policy, because we are changing everything to policy. And then under the banner configuration, again, it was just changing it so everything within the size matches of that on the policy. And down the bottom, it says, by signing this application, I acknowledge that I have read, understand, and agree to the terms of the Town of Lisbon's banner permit policy adopted by Council June 30th, 2015.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from council? Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the motion to accept the new banner permit policy.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Order passed, 7-0.
And the next item, please.
Order 2015-181, award paving bid.
Ryan?
Good evening.
Good evening.
In your packets, you have a memo along with the RFP that was sent out to Allstate Asphalt, Glidden Excavating, Harry C. Crooker and Sons, and Pike Industries. We did receive 3 bids this year. Allstate Asphalt submitted a bid of $186,506.82. Harry C. Crooker of $183,440.38, and Pike Industries of $220,326. We recommend awarding the 2015 paving to Harry C. Crooker and Sons.
Any comments or questions from council? Only comment or question I had, this is for the next fiscal year, correct?
This would be for them to maybe start tomorrow if possible, but yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the proposed fiscal year budget, we have $350,000 for paving.
250.
Is it 250? Oh, thank you, 250. Are you gonna go back out again to do more paving, or what's the plan?
My intention at this point, we went based on a $200,000 budget, was what we originally had,
Mhm.
and that's been increased to 250. My request would be to negotiate additional work with the low bidder based on, this was the original bid. You
Okay.
know, and if we can extend a road, we'll extend a road, or there's one, Birch Street is one of the next ones on the list, and it's right adjacent to area that they're gonna be working, and they may be able to fit that one in, and, you know, some combination thereof. And if you'd like me to come back to extend, you know, what we're gonna do, then if not, then I guess my request would be to expend the full amount in the next fiscal year.
Once the budget's approved.
Correct.
All right. Any comments or questions from council? All right. I'd open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the motion to accept the bid from Harry Crooker and Sons for the paving bid for the current year.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. We have a motion of a second. The only other thing I would question, if we wanted to add in the motion or do an amendment to the motion to authorize Ryan and the town manager to continue negotiations if we have more than this in the budget after the fiscal year is approved, so they don't have to come back. I'd make a motion, an amendment to the motion to authorize the Public Works Director and the town manager to continue negotiations with Harry C. Crooker and Sons to expend the full FY 15-16 paving budget.
I'll second that.
Any discussion on the amendment? All those in favor?
The amendment passed, 7-0. The main motion as amended needs to be voted on.
Any discussion on the main motion from Councillor Bickford and Councillor Garrison? See none? All those in favor?
Order passed, 7-0.
Thank you, Ryan. And the next item, please.
Order 2015-182, award striping bid.
Hello again. We've got a vast list of folks that we send the paving bid, the striping bid to every year. We get the same two, same two bidders every year. This year, a little flip, the low bidder was Lucas Striping at $16,389.12, which was actually the same price we got from them last year. And Markings Inc. Was $18,437.76. So we recommend awarding the striping to Lucas Striping. They're the ones that are located in Maine. The other vendor is located out of Massachusetts.
Any comments or questions? Open the floor for a motion.
Make the motion to award the bid to Lucas Striping.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Order passed, 7-0.
Thank you, Ryan. And the next item, please.
Order 2015-183, award the library masonry repair bid.
We sent out an RFP for masonry repairs to the library. It's a project that we've kind of had in the works for a while, and We're able to finally put it through and make Diane happy, which is what I like to do. We received 2 bids, Haskell and Hall, who's actually the company that's worked with us to develop our budget numbers, as well as Knowles Industrial Services Corporation. Haskell and Hall's bid was $45,726, and Knowles Industrial Services Corporation was $42,650. And we recommend awarding the project to Knowles Industrial Services Corporation, contingent upon acceptance of the municipal budget, because there's a portion of it that would be from this current fiscal year that's ended noon today, I guess, and what's in the next year's budget. So they're not going to be able to start the work till September, so it's not really a time crunch in terms of the budget standpoint.
Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the motion to accept the bid from Knowles.
Is there a second?
Second that.
Only question I have on that, how much, do you know how much is coming out of this current fiscal year?
24,000 and change, I think almost $24,800 or $900 is what we were going to carry forward.
24,925.53.
Any other comments or questions? All those in favor?
Order passed 7-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the next item, please.
Order 2015-184, the 2015-16 wastewater treatment plant budget.
And we included that in the budget package, and I just want to note that some of the changes to the wastewater treatment plant budget since the last time we talked about budgets. We added $3,750 for a health reimbursement account. We added $32,000 for property insurance, $32 for property insurance, and then we reduced the sewer line by $50,000. By doing that, it brings our expenditures in line with our revenues. So if you want to go ahead and approve the wastewater budget, then you want to take the council resolves and go towards the end, and there is an order for the sewer budget that includes the total expenditures and with the total estimated revenues. It's
Page 4.
page 5. You count the top.
2,
Oh, yours is double-sided, sorry
Mine's-
about that. And it also tells you what the price is per 100 cubic foot, and it sets the interest on delinquent fees. And then we have attached Exhibit A and Exhibit B that shows the wastewater budget and the revenues that we anticipate coming in under Exhibit A. It's the last page.
open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the motion to accept the wastewater budget.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
If we go to the front page, as we were provided here tonight, general ledger accounts 1415, either for carry forwards for either credit or debt. Go to the bottom, 2-2060-00 sewer carry forward of $106,276.78. Is that credit or is that debt?
That's a credit.
Credit. Do we know what that's? I'm
That's-
wondering if we're going to approve this budget, if we're carrying forward that much money, and I'm wondering
That's
why.
already in a general ledger account. It's not part of the current sewer budget.
Okay.
It's a carry forward from last year where we carried 120,000, and what's remaining of that is the 106,000, and that's for the sewer evaluation.
Oh, that's right. Well, that's right.
So it's not part of the expenses to be carried forward. There's nothing on the sewer side, I don't believe. Yes, there is. There's just one item
And
under
that's
the
all.
expense.
It's all ringing a bell now
Yeah.
from last year. Thank you. So that was my only question I had looking through this. Any other comments or questions? Council?
Can I just have clarification?
Yes.
It's on, the motion is to approve the order that's presented, because that includes the interest rate as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
We have a motion from Councilor Bickford. We have a second from Councilor Mativier. Any other comments or questions? See none. All those in favor of the order?
Order passed 7-0.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you to your staff for putting this together and their hard work. And the next item, please.
The 2015 185A, the 2015-16 municipal budget resolutions.
Okay, the current budget in front of you tonight, there is some difference in the municipal appropriations based on the fact that we are able to put back in the revenue sharing based on the state's budget. So what I've done is I've added back in the revenue sharing, and I also added into the municipal budget $50,000 for the paving, like Ryan mentioned earlier, and I also added back into the budget $75,000 to go towards fire truck replacement. By doing that and some other changes in the municipal budget, since the last time we talked about it, the mill rate at that time, I estimated to be $23.80, a drop of 0.6 of a mil. And as it stands tonight, it's going to be 20, if everything stayed the same and all evaluations stayed the same, which we know they're not because of the reval, but just say they did, it would be a reduction of 0.7 of a mil, because the current mill rate is $24.40, and we estimate the proposed tax rate would have been $23.70 if everything stayed the same. Some of the things that we did to the budget this year, we are no longer netting revenue to budget. We're actually budgeting all the expenses, and we're estimating all the revenues. So that added about $303,000 to my budget that never has been in the budget before. So that's why you can't look to see the budgeted amount and see a $300,000 decrease. It's because $303,000 is in the budget that's never been budgeted before from prior administrations. Since the last budget, we've added $33,000 to a health reimbursement account, $10,000 to legal fees, $3,300 for police gas, and then I already mentioned the $75,000 for fire truck replacement and $50,000 for paving. Those are some of the higher amounts. I also went back into the revenues, and I was able to add more to excise revenue. As of today, when we closed out the revenues, closed out year end, we have collected $165,000 more in excise revenue compared to the estimated amount. I look back at last year. Last year, we collected $80,000 more at year end. So this upcoming budget, I've added from the start of the budgets to this one tonight, I've added $60,000 more in excise revenue, and I think it will exceed that because we collected $165 more. So that just shows you in this area, things are turning around a little bit to collect that much more in excise tax. People are buying newer vehicles, so it was $80,000 more last year. This year it's $165,000 more, which is just incredible. I can't get over it, but that's the way it is. And so that's helped with the overall budget. And then I also have the budget resolves ready for voting on tonight. I have the carry forward balances if you so choose to approve the budget tonight. And these are as of today. I just have one correction that I'm going to make as we go through this process.
If we approve the budget tonight, are we going to go through and do a department by department, or can we do a full municipal budget at once?
No, you need to do it by the departments. And I've got that. Like
You have
for
that
the
with you?
general, yes, it's included.
It's a handout we had.
It's a handout. That,
This one?
yeah, it's that that stack that you just had, Dylan.
Also, each one of different orders? Okay. All right there.
Okay, yep. Starting with the expenses, well, actually, it should start on the front with the general ledger accounts to be carried, and then the expense accounts to be carried, and then it starts in with your municipal budget, starting with your general government, and then it goes to public safety.
Get rid of this one over there. So just so clear, in this budget that we have before us tonight, we added an additional $50,000 for paving, so brought the budget from 200,000, 250,000. We reinstated the input $75,000 back in the fire department budget for capital improvements. And this is a reduction of one patrol position from the police department to fill the sergeant position, but this does still include a detective position.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And it also has the reduction of the hours for the reserve officers. There's a reduction in the budget, as Mr. Pardue explained a little while ago.
I have a question. Does this budget include the removal of the one truck driver position at Public Works?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing's changed there.
Okay.
It's still gone.
And that position is vacant.
Right.
That would impact snowplow driving snow routes, correct?
Yes.
One of the big questions is after this budget is passed, to make sure that the council, if the council meets the $300,000 goal that we set out to do in the beginning. So I just want to briefly go through my additions and also for the public to hear how we got to the total reduction. Please correct me as we
Right.
go along if I'm wrong here. So if we look at the other revenues, it's an increase of $330,491 because we're not netting revenue into expense, which then we added another $150,000 into revenue because we originally took it out because of the municipal revenue sharing being reduced from the state level, but that didn't happen. So we added that in to put in an additional $480,491 in additional revenue for the total municipal budget, correct? All right. And then the municipal budget looks like a $112,103 increase because full expenditures are being budgeted and not netting with revenue, correct?
Exactly.
So if we minus that 112,103 from the 480,491, that gives us a reduction in the tax rolls on the municipal budget of $368,388. Is that correct?
Right, right, because you're including the additional revenues like the 60,000 for the excise
Okay.
revenue that's in there, yes.
I just want to make sure that in my head I did that math right, because it's really important to me. Personally, if I'm going to vote to hold the school accountable to our directive, I want to make sure that as I vote on the municipal budget, I vote to hold our feet to the fire as well. I just want to make sure that we did that. And looking at this, it looks like we exceeded that goal by $68,388, which is great in my opinion, with the work of the staff in all of the administration collectively working together. It shows what a team can do when a team sits down to work. So I really appreciate the staff doing all their hard work with this, and I know it wasn't easy. Reducing staff and reducing budgets is not fun, but it's a reality, unfortunately.
I would just like to say one other thing, too. The municipal appropriation, this doesn't include the county and what we raise for the school, but just the municipal expenditures of $7,515,505. That is the total municipal budget. That's all we'll be allowed to spend. The revenue sharing and other revenues is a figure that we estimate, and that plays into the tax commitment, and that's what helps on your tax rate. We don't get that money in and net it and spend it along with the $7,515,000. Our total budget is $7,515,000. I just wanted to make that clear because it's a little different with the school's budget versus our budget. We don't budget the same way. We can't spend those revenues. They are used for the tax commitment, to offset the tax rate.
It's a very good point to make. Very good point. Any other comments or questions from council before we move on to the orders? No? All right. Let's move on. So council will be following along with this packet we have here with all the orders in it, and we'll just go right from the beginning. We'll go through each individual one. In previous years, we have done a roll call vote. How does council wish to do this evening? Roll call vote or regular vote?
Roll call vote is usually a good
Okay.
idea for
Roll
something
call
of this
vote
magnitude.
has been requested. So I'd open the floor for a motion regarding the General ledger accounts 2014, 2015 balances either credit or debit to be carried forward.
I'll make that motion to carry forward.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Yes. Counselor Lunt?
Yes.
Counselor Brunel?
Yes.
Counselor Bickford?
Yes.
Counselor Pesky?
Yes.
Counselor Crafts?
Yes.
Counselor McTevier?
Yes.
And Counselor Garrison?
Yes.
7 yeas, 0 nays, order passed.
On to the next one. Expense accounts 2014, 2015 balances to be carried forward. General government town manager audit, general government grant match, general government town buildings, assessing contract services, public works, culverts, public works, road improvements, solid waste, R&M equipment, wastewater licenses. Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to have an explanation of what we're going to do with that $50,000 grants match that we're carrying forward. What's the plan for that?
We're just going to set that aside and reapply for the CDBG grant, and if we're successful, that will be our grant match.
Reapplication would be when?
We'll start at the same time as we did. Tracy's gone. It'll be at the same time. At the same time. Yeah. You know, if there is any funds left over, we may be eligible for some from other grants that have closed and people have not used the funds, and then we would just reapply for the difference.
Thank you.
Account E0330554440, the Public Works Road Improvement Trail Project. Now, if I remember correctly, that is for the sidewalk. Tracy?
That, is Ryan still here?
No. Tracy, can you come to the podium for a second? The $20,000 that we put aside for the trail, for the sidewalk from the trail down the end of Davis Street, that's in here for to be carried. Will that be done this year, or will that be waiting to be done after the application we get an application that's approved?
Yeah, my conversation with Ryan on that, I think is going to play into projects and where staff is as far as completing some projects. He wasn't sure. And I'm sorry I can't answer for Ryan because he's not here.
Is that $20,000 still going to be able to be used as part of the matching that we had?
The only way that it can be used for that is that if we go for the grant application again for 2016, we're unable to expend those funds, so it would have to wait until the same process that we went through this time. So in other words, the sidewalk couldn't be done. If the sidewalk was done now, we would not be able to use that as a match towards the grant. It would have to wait until we were approved again,
Okay.
or got the funding.
On a side note, I think we need to come back and visit this to see. I think it's important that we approve this tonight, but I think we need to come back and visit this as a council and decide if we want this sidewalk to be done this year and make it a priority, or just to wait and have it put aside to be used as matching funds for the next year. And I think that's important because we have raised the money and that sidewalk is needed. So if we could put that on an agenda for discussion, please.
I think maybe we should meet with the Route 196 Master Plan Committee
Okay.
and, get their input on that, whether they think it should be held over or done this year.
All right.
Because if we don't get it next year, what do we do? Keep putting it off?
That's where I'm going with it.
I
It doesn't make
agree.
sense.
And we're also looking at possibility of other projects that could tie into this as well. I mean, one of the things we have the DOT project at the intersection, so we're hoping to leverage that. I mean, we couldn't count that a little bit of a match. Basically, it may help us out because of projects already going on, and we want to enhance the same area based on what DOT is going to do. So, it's some work. We can discuss it.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
We have a motion from Councilor Bickford. We have a second from Councilor Garrison for this authorization. Any other comments or questions? Roll call vote, please.
Yes. Counselor Garrison?
Yes.
Counselor McTevier?
Yes.
Counselor Crafts?
Yes.
Counselor Pesky?
Yes.
Counselor Bickford?
Yes.
Counselor Brunel?
Yes.
Counselor Lunt?
Yes.
We have 7 yeas, 0 nays, order passed.
2015-2016 Municipal Budget Resolution, General Government Division, Department 01. It will be total for General Government budget, $1,339,167. Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the total for general government of $1,339,167.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Counselor Pesky?
Yes.
Counselor Bickford?
Yes.
Counselor Brunel?
Yes.
Counselor Lund?
Yes.
Counselor Crafts?
Yes.
Counselor McTevier?
Yes.
And Counselor Garrison?
Yes.
7 yeas, 0 nays, order passed.
Next one will be Public Safety Department 02, total budget public safety, $2,248,499. Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the motion for public safety for $2,248,499.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I had one question. In light of the report we got, Chief, Diane, I should say, the reserve officers cutting those hours, how's that going to affect? I know that was one of the things they brought up in the report, that cutting those hours may not be a good idea.
Right.
What would that cost us to put back in?
Was it about 10,000? It was? I don't remember.
Next
I think
question
I have
is-
it right here.
The next question is, Chief, do you agree with his assessment? Do you need those reserve hours, or can you function without them?
Chief, can you just use the podium for me, so the public
Yeah.
viewing at home can hear you? Thank you.
Question?
Greg, go ahead.
Can you function without those reserve hours? Those, well, how many did they cut? 400?
It was 800.
800?
800, right.
How does
That was a significant cut to the reserve unit.
I
And
understand.
the reserves do supplement weak points in the schedule. So we do use reserves. We need the reserves.
Well, I know you have some weak points
We've
right
gone
now
down-
because we don't have
With the
bodies.
current budget,
but
we're down to 1 reserve shift per week for 52 weeks and 2 for 22 weeks. Where in the past, we were scheduled for 3 year-round and 4 in the summertime. So we've cut it down quite a bit.
With that number?
If the budget notes from 4/14/2015, if I'm reading it correctly, number 9, Police Department temporary wages reduced by $14,800.
Okay.
That doesn't include the benefits that went along with it, too. That's just the temporary wage line, so there would be corresponding benefits, like the FICA, unemployment, workers' comp. Is that listed separately?
FICA, it was $5,159.
But does that include,
I don't know. I'm
I
not
think
sure.
that might include the officer that we didn't fund, too, but I don't know. I don't have that in front of me.
I don't have it broken out that way, it just has it all as one.
It has it all, right.
Thanks, Chief.
All right. Let's see. I lost my spot here. We have a motion from Councilor Bickford. We have a second from Councilor Mativier for Public Safety Department 02. Any other comments or questions? Roll call vote, please.
Counselor McTevier?
Yes.
Counselor Brunel?
Yes.
Counselor Crafts?
Yes.
Counselor Bickford?
Yes.
Counselor Pesky?
Yes.
Counselor Garrison?
Yes.
Counselor Lund?
Yes.
7 yeas, 0 nays, order passed.
Public Works Department 03. Total for the Public Works budget, $2,441,545. Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the motion for public works for $2,441,545.
Is there a second?
Second.
Comments or questions? Roll call vote, please.
Counselor Lund?
No.
Counselor Brunel?
Yes.
Counselor Bickford?
Yes.
Counselor Pesky,
Yes.
Counselor Crafts,
Yes.
Counselor McTevier,
Yes.
Counselor Garrison.
Yes.
We have 6 yeas, 1 nay, order passed.
Public Services, Department 04, total public services budget, $782,737. Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make that motion for public services, $782,737.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Counselor Garrison,
Yes.
Counselor McTevier,
Yes.
Counselor Crafts,
Yes.
Counselor Pesky,
Yes.
Counselor Bickford,
Yes.
Counselor Brunel,
Yes.
Counselor Lunt.
Yes.
7 yeas, 0 nays, order passed.
For general assistance, county tax, economic development, abatements, debt service, and bonds, Department 0509. Total for general assistance, county tax, economic development, abatements, debt service, and bonds, $1,286,161. Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Don't bother reading it. Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Counselor Pesky,
Yes.
Counselor Bickford,
Yes.
Counselor Brunel,
Yes.
Counselor Lunt,
Yes.
Counselor Crafts,
Yes.
Counselor McTevier,
Yes.
Counselor Garrison.
Yes.
7 yeas, 0 nays, order passed.
Order that the municipal budget for the town of Lisbon for fiscal year commencing on July 1st, 2015, and ending on June 30th, 2016, be it hereby is adopted with the total expenditure of $8,098,109, balanced with a total of $2,849,706 in estimated revenue. A summary of appropriations is attached to this resolution as Exhibit A. A summary of estimated revenue is attached to this resolution as Exhibit B. Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the motion to adopt the town budget.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Counselor Crafts,
Yes.
Counselor McTevier,
Yes.
Counselor Pesky,
Yes.
Counselor Bickford,
Yes.
Counselor Brunel,
Yes.
Counselor Garrison,
Yes.
Counselor Lunt.
Yes.
7 yeas, 0 nays, order passed.
Order that the town council authorize the following accounts to lapse into undesignated fund balance. Tax lien costs, $944.45. Police Department drug, $2,888.24. I'd open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the motion.
My numbers are not the same as yours.
Yeah, why not?
I just got a new one from the manager.
That's
She just passed it to me.
That's the change on the
Cheating.
tax lien costs. Yeah, I didn't
You're
update
cheating,
that.
You don't share with us, okay.
Sorry.
Do we have a-
At least it's lower than, so, okay.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Counselor Lunt,
Yes.
Counselor Brunel,
Yes.
Counselor Bickford,
Yes.
Counselor Pesky,
Yes.
Counselor Crafts,
Yes.
Counselor McTevier,
Yes.
and Counselor Garrison.
Yes.
7 yeas, 0 nays, order passed.
Order the assessor of the town of Lisbon be hereby directed to assess a tax upon all real estate in Lisbon and liable for tax thereon, and assess the owner for personal estate liable to the tax on the first date of April 2015 AD in accordance with the provisions of the state of Maine in such cases made and provided. Make perfect list and under the hand of such assessments and commitment of the same to the collector of taxes to the town of Lisbon are on or before the first day of July 2015. All taxes assessed and above and committed to the collector shall be due on July 1st, 2015. That having set the date and time which the first installment of taxes shall become due, to wit, July 1, 2015, any taxes remaining unpaid after September 15, 2015 shall bear interest from September 16th, 2015 at a rate of 7% per annual said interest to be added and become a part of said taxes, that having set date on which the second installment of taxes shall become due, to wit, July 1, 2015, any taxes remaining unpaid after March 15, 2016, shall bear interest from March 16, 2016, at a rate of 7% per annual said interest to be added and become part of the said taxes. Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Counselor Garrison?
Yes.
Counselor McTevier?
Yes.
Counselor Crafts?
Yes.
Counselor Pesky?
Yes.
Counselor Bickford?
Yes.
Counselor Brunel?
Yes.
Counselor Lund?
Yes.
7 yeas, 0 nays, order passed.
Order that the tax collector and hereby is authorized to accept money prior to the date of tax commitment in prepayment of taxes and to issue receipts for the same. It shall be discretionary with the tax collector, town manager to make arrangements through the Town of Lisbon Tax Club policy with any taxpayer for a schedule of monthly payments without interest in such arrangements as they jointly deem necessary. I'd open the floor for a motion.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Counselor Pesky?
Yes.
Counselor Crafts?
Yes.
Counselor McTevier?
Yes.
Counselor Garrison?
Yes.
Counselor Lund?
Yes.
Counselor Brunel?
Yes.
Counselor Bickford?
Yes.
7 yeas, 0 nays, order passed.
Order that the following categories of state funds to be accepted during the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2015 and ending June 30th, 2016. Municipal revenue sharing, local road assistance, state aid to education, including federal pass-through funds and property tax relief, snowmobile reimbursement money, tree growth reimbursement, general assistance reimbursement, BETE exemption reimbursement, homestead exemption reimbursement, state grant, and/or other funds. Open the floor for motion.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Counselor Bickford?
Yes.
Counselor Brunel?
Yes.
Counselor Crafts?
Yes.
Counselor Pesky?
Yes.
Counselor Garrison?
Yes.
Counselor McTevier?
Yes.
Counselor Lunt?
Yes.
7 yeas, 0 nays, order passed.
Madam Clerk and Town Manager, I believe that concludes our exhibit. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the next item, please.
Is order 2015-186, authorization to expend funds without approved school budget?
Diane?
Right, since we don't have a approved school budget, the council needs to authorize the expenditure of funds to get us through. We figured out on a monthly basis what the school spends, and the council would need to authorize an expenditure of an amount not to exceed 2/12 of the total proposed fiscal year 2016 annual school budget approved by council on May 19th, 2015, and submitted to the budget validation referendum on June 9th, during the period from July 1st, 2015 until the adoption of the fiscal year 16 budget. I think we need to change the last part of that until the adoption of the fiscal year 16 budget to your last meeting in July, where if we'll have to do this again before the August 11th vote to allow them to expend more funds. This won't take you, I don't believe the 2/12 will take the school right through till the next budget validation. So I think you need to change that to the July 21st meeting.
I'll make a motion to change it to the July 21st meeting.
So,
If we find out that's going to be, we can bring it to you sooner if we have to. But I think we'll be okay bringing it to the July. We look back at last year's expenditures to see, and that's how we calculated that.
so for clarification, Council Bickford, you're making a motion to, as what the manager read, with an exception of changing the adoption of the FY16 budget to until July 21st, 2015?
Right.
Okay. And is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right. My only question would be, has the administration, or will the administration be advising Superintendent Green?
Yes, we will.
Okay. All those in favor?
Order passed, 7-0.
And the next item, please.
Order 2015-187, authorization to expend funds without approved municipal budget.
We don't need to act on that since the budget's been approved.
Okay.
And the next item, please.
Is under other business. We'll move to B, town manager's report.
Nothing to report this evening.
And the next item, please.
Is C, Gartley Street property.
I just wanted to give the council an update on the property. We did have Dan Stockford review the state statute on the disposition of school property, and he felt that it was very clear that the authority to dispose of school property lies with the school committee. So we will be taking that off the list of town, not off the list of town-owned property, but off the list for sale.
Appreciate you giving us that update. It's another reason why I have strong confidence in Brandon Isaacson, extremely high confidence with Attorney Stockford, even when the opinion might not be what the council wanted to hear. He still provides an opinion that protects the council, that is strong, and there is no loophole that someone else could try to frame. So I appreciate Attorney Stockford's integrity in providing the council with necessary information. Next item, please.
Is audience participation and response for new items.
To open the floor for anybody with audience participation, anything you would like to address. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Kelly Rogers, 32 Mill. My comments are one more time coming to advocate for support for our schools. And you had made the comments about, you know, when your budget was passed and doing it within the constraints that you had requested from the beginning, making the $300,000 cuts. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like that cut was happening because you were able to add certain revenue that wasn't added in the past. That's a very different scenario than what is being asked of the schools. The schools being asked to cut. The schools don't have certain revenues that can make up for those cuts. Excuse me. You made a comment about when teams come together, what can happen. Awesome things can happen, which is why I'm confused about why the town council refuses to meet with the school committee to work out this issue. I know that an invitation was put out to have sort of a workshop, and it was reported to the public that there was no response to that invitation, so maybe you could shed some light on that. I want to emphasize again that the cuts that you're proposing for our schools is not just a monetary impact. It is an impact on people, on families, on our community. And as you think about that moving forward, just please be aware of what the impact actually is. It's not just money. It's not just make this demand and meet this need. It's important to keep in mind, too, that for those of you who aren't aware of what happens in schools, the education is so much more than learning how to compute and read and write. It's teaching people how to become citizens and interact and interpret their world and contribute and make meaningful contributions to their world. And I just urge you to really be thinking as you move forward what the impact of your votes are on our community and our kids. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. I'll just briefly clarify a couple of things. You mentioned a response wasn't provided from Superintendent Green regarding a meeting or workshop. Councilor Garrison, we all got the email, did respond. Councilor Garrison did say that he would support a workshop or something of that nature. The rest of the council did not have an opinion. In order for a meeting to be called, we need to have 4 that are in consensus for that to happen. But I wanted to point out that Councilor Garrison did send an email that he would support that type of workshop. And then you mentioned about we could add additional revenues. It's not that we added additional revenues to the budget. What happened is in prior years, when people would pay, a citizen would pay money to the community, that money was never budgeted as a revenue. It was always put into the expense line, so you never actually got the true cost of what a department was costing. So what we did was, instead of, say you have a child that goes to the rec program, instead of, when that program cost you $100 and our cost was $200, what happened in the past sometimes was that $100 that you paid was put into the expense line, so it only looked like it was costing us $100 to fund that program, but in reality it was costing us $200, but you were paying $100, so it made it come out to a $100 difference. So what the manager did with the support of the council was to break it out differently, so we could see that for your child to go to this program, it does cost $200, but we see $100 in revenue, so we could see an exact expenditure of every single department within the community. So that's why it looks like it's new revenue, but it's actually not new revenue. It's how it's budgeted and portrayed to the community. So more transparency and easier to understand and for citizens to navigate, because a municipal budget is not easy for the average citizen to deal with that's not entrenched in it for a 3-year term. So that's why it looks that way. Yeah, the money was still there. It was just budgeted differently. Instead of going from you have account A for an expenditure, account B for revenue, and then what a citizen would pay was going from your pocketbook into account A, when it should have been going from your pocketbook to account B to show it as a revenue, so we could see exactly what we were raising through revenue and have an exact expenditure. I can explain it to you more clearly later on if that will help you, but we have to move on at this point. Anybody else would like to address the council? Mr. Robitel.
Thank you. Mike Robitel, 17 Charity Street. Under the new items, I guess is going to be the police report that we discussed this evening. It seems to me that we've been waiting anxiously for this report. The council has said that on multiple occasions, and that they were going to make their decisions based on that police report. The police report, as I heard it tonight, clearly stated to me that we needed a detective, we needed to increase the reserve hours, we needed to bring the sergeant back, and we had to look at the other patrolmen. How much time did we take and get input from the community, and how much input did we get so that we could make decisions here tonight? We weren't allowed to make a decision, and you made a budget tonight based on what? Wasted money. Wasted money on that report. We didn't support the police department, and they told us to. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else like to address the council?
Jim Harriman, 393 Lisbon Street. It was brought to my attention about a week ago that the high end of the schools are overpaid, that our superintendent is one of the highest paid in a 50-school radius. Going by the district or the region that we have, he's one of the lowest ones, along with most of the administration. I don't know where somebody's getting their information from, but it would be nice if it's somebody that's from this council would put out the correct information from our district. We keep shooting down our schools, and yes, the superintendent did put out an invite, and it's sad to see that only one person would respond to that. This town is here to help you, and you to help us. We should see the right information get put out.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to address the council? See none? Council have any comments or questions? See none? Next item, please.
Is under appointments, Order 2015-188, Planning Board resignation, Associate Member Richard Long.
Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make that a motion for resignation of Richard Long.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Order passed, 7-0.
And the next item, please.
Order 2015-189, Planning Board appointment, Regular Member Richard Long.
Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the motion for the regular appointment of Mr. Richard Long.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All those in favor?
Order passed, 7-0.
And the next item, please.
Order 2015-190, Planning Board Member, Associate Member James Lemieux, reappointment.
Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the motion to appoint Jim Lemieux as associate member, planning board.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Order passed, 7-0.
And the next item, please.
Is council communications.
Councilor Garrison, we'll start on your side. Good
I
evening.
have two things that aren't specifically related to council, but they are communications that I've received over the last few days. I've received a number of cold calls from different organizations wanting me to give them my credit card number so that I could support different charitable organizations. I would remind folks that you should check out those organizations before you give them money or credit card number. Quite a few of them that say that they do all this for example, veterans. I have specific ones I give to. I don't respond to cold calls very positively, but I did look this one up, and I believe it was 6 cents on every dollar that actually goes to the veterans programs themselves. So please be careful on those calls. The other one is one of my favorites. The folks at Microsoft Technical Support will not call you at home and tell you that your computer is causing a virus. I won't go into the expletives that were used after I kept the individual on the line for about 20 minutes doing various things that I actually wasn't doing. But he was not happy with my responses at the end, so that ended quite badly, but they frequently also call, and no. So please don't fall victim to those. My mother was almost a victim of one of those. If you do the wrong things, they will gain access to your computer, they will cause havoc in your life, and it will not be nice. So please, just be careful.
Anything? Council Lund.
I don't have anything.
Council Mativier. Council Bickford. Council Crafts. Council Brunel. I don't have anything either. Next item, please.
There is no executive session. It would be an order to adjourn to a workshop to discuss the medical marijuana ordinance and the itinerant vendor ordinance.
Open the floor for a motion.
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
We will be taking a 5 or so minute recess, and then we'll reconvene. And all those in favor?
Order passed, 7-0.
I've already signed all of these.
Yeah,
You're gonna have, you know,
that's
you
why I
have a
was
bunch of
very
part-time
close.
guys who do
I was really
I would've liked to have your
police
support.
budget for that too.
Police study?
I know,
I can,
I know.
I'll have to do it tomorrow. This is how it, got it tonight and handed it out at the meeting, so I'm gonna have to.
That's what happens when you don't carry paper with you. It's all Larry's fault. I think Larry stole my pen. No?
All right, I'll bring us back into the Tuesday, June 30th, 2015 to meet, 2015 meeting. We're now in a workshop for 2 items. Remind the public that during this period, the council will be having discussion. At the end of the workshop, if time allows, we will open it up for public to ask questions or comments on the items that were discussed tonight, but we won't be taking audience participation during the actual discussion among council. I do remind council that the camera is on for the public to be able to view our workshop on Friday, so please continue to use your microphones as we do during the regular meeting. I know sometimes we don't. And our first item on the workshop, please.
Is medical marijuana ordinance.
Councilor Bunt.
This has been brought forward from code enforcement and economic community development to the council. We voted in this moratorium to ban medical marijuana dispensary from being erected or put in Lisbon for 90 days. So now we're here to a workshop to discuss where we want to go from here. If the medical marijuana dispensary is something that we want to allow in Lisbon, and if not, then we'll need to discuss making an ordinance to ban it from the community. So, whoever would like to start or share your opinion, or if the administration has anything, or Chief Brooks, kick us off.
I think it's something.
Go ahead, Roger.
I've watched a lot of television programs, read a lot about it. But still, my constituents are pretty divided, so basically all I'm gonna say is I think it ought to go up for referendum in November. And go from there. I'm in favor of it, but, my constituents are surely not. So, I can't, that's my thought.
Okay. Well, I guess we need to first, we'll go right on the horn here. Decide if we have a majority, what the majority wants, and then we'll decide, we'll know where to go for discussion, what avenue we need to take at this point. So, Greg, do you have anything?
Well, last time I looked, they aren't doing any licenses for dispensaries and have no plans to do so. So I don't think this is something we have to sweat, in which case I have no objection to having it on the November ballot. If that's what the council would like to do, we can do that. But, again, I don't think that it's really an item that we have to really worry about to that extent.
Okay. Mark?
I know the people who were talking about this said it was not a dispensary and it wouldn't fall under the ordinance written for a dispensary. So have we gotten any look into that deeper to see if they're truthful and that they would not fall under that? Because it's kind of pointless to waste our time on this if that's not even going to impact the situation that's going on.
But this wasn't brought up just for that one instance. This was brought up from the administration in case something comes up later on down the road. And that's why we are here tonight. So
Something we voted on a while ago and then it expired.
Right.
in 2010.
Yeah.
So
I would support going forward with something, but I'm curious about, as Greg said, that there no more are allowed, at least until someone closes with someplace somewhere else. You know, they're not allowed to have any more, so it's not really an immediate situation.
So we could extend it out until putting it on a referendum. If that's where we want to go, put it on a referendum.
So this would only be good for 180 days. So we would have to do another one when this one expires, right?
Did you do 90 days?
90, yeah. So we'd have to do another one at the end of this period, correct?
And at the end of the
And we can do two.
As long as you want.
Yeah.
You'd add another 90 and another 90.
Okay. So Mark, you would favor this going to a referendum?
I think that would be the best call if we're not in immediate need of it.
Eric?
I'm also not, well, I guess others are in favor. I'm not in favor of it, but I don't disagree. I think I think it's a good idea to let the people decide on it. I said I don't agree with it, but that's just my own personal opinion. But I think if it went to a November ballot, I think that would be a good way to let the people decide on it.
Dale?
Yeah. Referendum, I guess. It makes sense to me.
Chris?
That doesn't make sense because you put it more out to the public. Again, people in the audience from Drapo's, they're not looking to be a dispensary, so it really won't even affect them.
No.
Perfect. Okay. Guess you know where to go.
Okay.
Makes it that easy.
Yeah.
What?
I'd like to hear from Tracy.
Sure.
One of the things we hadn't considered in this is that the state laws. So if you're looking at going up for referendum, whether it ban something, you really need to understand what the state laws, what you can and cannot do. So I guess that's kind of what we really need to do is the research as far as on what the state allows a community to do or not do when it comes to this.
By the looks of things, we've got till November to find that out.
Yeah, but I just want to clear that. Because you do have, there are certain items within a state statute that allows it. And you have some leadway as far as in with land use, where it can and cannot be located, or if you're close to a school. But I don't think we have, and I don't know if you've done much research, neither chief on it, But can you just say altogether, can a community say, no, no way, you can ban it, you know what I mean? The moratorium was put in place to do the research and to gather up all that information and put some sort of ordinance in place, what fits for the community. And I just think that we still need to do some due diligence as far as on the homework and having all the information to make sure that we're kind of in compliance with what the state statute says. Does that make sense?
I was going to go along with what I was going to say, because I wanted to see something from the administration that it explains explains where a medical marijuana dispensary could be put in Lisbon. Can it be put right next to the Maritime Moore Center? Can it only go in certain zones of the community? So I wanted to see that, and then I wanted Chief Brooks to see if he could find some research on if a crime rate goes up in an area that has had medical marijuana dispensaries, if there's any research or data to show that a crime rate goes up or it stays the same or whatever it is, before I made my decision too. So I think that collectively, if you work on the statute, Chief Brooks can look at some research, and Dennis can look at some maps, give us some maps with zoning. I think we should
work with Amanda as well.
I think we should reconvene and bring all those pieces together for more discussion. But at this point, I think the council does have a directive of if we can legally do this, to what extent to move forward with. So I think that is the next piece we need to do.
Yeah, I think it would be worthwhile finding out whether or not it's possible to ban it entirely, because, I mean, obviously that would change positions like Eric's. If you can't legally ban it, then, you're regulating it is better than nothing. So at least you prevent it from being, right next to a school or something.
And you do have that leadway in it. I just don't want something to kind of end up on the referendum saying whether you want to.
You could ban it if you can't.
The other thing, the referendum could be just as simple as asking the community whether they would like to have a dispensary here in the community or not. It can be as simple as that, and then whatever that answer is, then you can craft your ordinance around that, rather than saying you're going to ban it altogether. I took it the way the way I thought you were going to go for the referendum is just to take the pulse of the community, whether they wanted one or not. Not to just
non-binding.
Right, exactly, a non-binding, just to see what the community wants, and then I think it'll be up to us to craft it within the law.
Within the law, yeah.
I think we probably want to talk to Attorney Stockford and see, if we're allowed to ban it completely under the state law, or if, regulating it to certain zones is the most you're allowed to do.
Right.
So I think staff has their thought on where to go.
But you can be sued if you say no zones at all.
So the council is set with having staff go do that and come back to us. And I think sooner the better we reconvene to talk about this. You guys all set down there?
Yes.
Move forward? Okay. All right. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you.
And the next item, please.
Is the itinerant vendor ordinance?
Greg, this is all you.
All me. Well, again, my concerns on this were the fact that our ordinances are kind of vague as to where the flea market falls. I think we need to firm that up. As far as the fee schedule, we've made the fee schedule, but where does the flea market actually fall within our ordinance?
Are you talking about the fee schedule or actual ordinance where it falls?
The actual ordinance, because our ordinance is, like we discussed last meeting, our ordinance is kind of vague on whether it actually falls under the mass gathering, or whether it should fall under its own umbrella.
I mean, it does mention flea markets there in section A under section 10-256. So I think that I agree with you that there's some ambiguity, but it seems to be clearly intended.
It throws it in their mass gatherings and flea markets. It's like, okay, are they a different animal? In other words, are we going with circus animals, or are we going with elephants here and lions here? It's just kind of.
Well, from this, it seems like and I could be reading it wrong, that a flea market would be exempt from following these location
Yeah, under
mandates.
location, yeah, it has mass gatherings or flea markets. So why do flea markets have to get a mass gathering permit? Not saying they shouldn't be permitted, I'm just saying, do they fall under the umbrella as a mass?
They have for
mass
20 years.
gathering? Yeah, I know, so,
We might be better off to draft a new ordinance in addition, if you want to. It costs some money for legal to review it.
Personally, I think it's pretty clear. It says vendors authorized to participate in carnivals, festivals, mass gatherings, or flea markets. So I'm not thinking that, I think this is, that mass gathering clause there could be covering anything that's not already said there that would classify as a mass gathering, is my take on it.
what was this section from? I gotta look at where it's at. Hold on.
10256A.
I know, but where did this, what's the? 10-255, hold on a second, let me look. Trying to remember where I was looking last time. Don't remember if I saved it.
I believe it's under itinerant vendors, in section 10-251.
And I don't know if this makes it clearer or muddier, but 10251, license required, no person shall offer for sale any food, drink, or merchandise as itinerant vendor without first obtaining a license from the town council. Landowners offering space for charge for itinerant vendors must obtain a license for the facility, which will cover the facility. Now, I would think a flea market,
That would seem to be.
Yeah,
pretty
that-
covered under
yes.
that one. Yeah, that's that section.
but isn't
yeah.
that covering mass gathering?
Do one.
Yep.
They're itinerant vendors.
Yes.
It's not a building.
I think the flea market's covered in there.
I do too.
That's what it shows.
That's how I in
Okay.
reading it. But no, I want to hear your
I'm just-
position on it. I'm not just I'm not seeing it clearly yet. That's all. Where you're coming from. But this is important to have this dialogue because I'm sure there's other people that are also confused. What do you guys think? Any opinion?
I think it's very clear.
Okay.
Well, there you go.
That's,
I mean, you're reading the same stuff we read.
But hey, listen. Sometimes we all think differently when it comes to this stuff, you know?
Would you like me to get an opinion from the attorney on this?
Now, there's an issue
it
with,
says flea market.
yeah, where it says terms of license fee, it says 12 months and it says $200. I don't know if that's been changed since I think that would apply
Where
more
are you looking,
directly.
Mark?
That's not the
Yeah.
mass gathering, though.
Right, but I'm saying flea markets would seem to be covered as the itinerant vendor situation rather than the mass gatherings.
Splitting hairs, gentlemen.
Yeah.
True, but
What would be the difference, Mark?
Well, under
It'd be
the fee
$200.
schedule that's at least listed here, it says 12 months is $200
Yeah, I see
versus the
that.
12-month mass gathering permit is $400. So that's a difference in price there.
So,
So if he's arguing he's an itinerant vendor gatherer rather than a mass gathering, then it would be
Yeah.
a different situation.
because that,
I don't know
that
if
was
food
my,
would be covered
I think
there.
that was my original point, is they had those listed separately under the license. They have mass gathering, and they have flea markets. So is mass gathering a flea market? And if so, why are they listed separately? That was where it
So-
gets vague. So why,
their fee's $400 right now, right?
yeah, exactly. If they have to get a mass gathering permit, then it's $400.
Right.
But again, they're mentioned separately up above, so if you're going down and talking about the licenses here, if they have to get a 12-month license versus a 12-month mass gathering,
See,
But I think theirs is a mass gathering because it says here that mass gathering shall obtain a license for the event which will cover all vendors.
that is a point
Yeah.
that, yeah, that is a point I considered.
and the other piece, I
But our-
think, like I said earlier, is that maybe, and obviously none of us are part of the charter, commission
Yep.
writing, maybe they put it in here as the major categories that be a mass gathering here in Lisbon, such as a carnival or a festival, and a flea market, because we already had flea markets then, and they put the clause in there for mass gathering to cover, like use it as an umbrella to capture anything else.
I believe that is correct.
That's my thought of it.
Well, if each person at the flea market is considered a separate vendor, then yes.
Right.
Which I would say they are. They're different owners.
But there's a question, even if we, agree on the language there, do we want to charge $400
Well, that's what the
per
bottom
year, or do we
line
want to
is.
reduce it back to what it was, or something in the middle?
Because that's what the bottom line is, that's what you complain about. It's not the language on it, it's the fee, it's the amount.
It's,
So if there's a way that we can adjust it, how much was it last year?
we can't do that this year.
Right, we've already collected it from another vendor.
Well, we could change the fee
But
schedule.
you can change it.
We could change the fee schedule and refund them the money.
We can't, I already asked Dan Stockford
Really
that.
can't refund money?
No, because it's an ordinance in place right now, and we collected it. You don't have the ability to waive it. And that's what you'd be doing.
We can
I
waive it for
asked, I
next-
anticipated that.
waive
Or we'd
it
have to do it
next
for
year.
next year then.
You don't have the ability
Waive
to
it at
waive
all.
it.
We'd
There's
have to
no
change the
ability
fee
to
No, no, I mean,
waive.
we'd have to
Right.
You'd
change
have to
it for
change
next
the
year.
Change it
fee.
for next year.
Yeah,
What I mean.
there's no ability to waive any of these.
Right, but we can change it for next year.
Right, if that's
Go
what
back to what it
you
was.
choose to do, yes.
I mean, I
Okay.
think where we've come into a problem here is, just like with other things, so many things went by the wayside and weren't maintained that last year we got in a position where we updated the whole fee schedule all at once in a fashion with an interim administration. And I think this year what the council did was good, how we reviewed it again. I think every single year, and of course I'm not going to be here forever, the council should review this fee schedule on a yearly basis, maybe the first meeting in January, after the council's established, to set that structure for anything going, that will come to them on their council year, that they're all playing with the same cards. I don't think it's fair to switch this halfway.
I don't think we can.
Well, we can change the fee structure at any time. We would have to go through the fee structure process, but it would be, the people that have already paid would have one, and then this new group would have a different fee structure, and I don't think that's fair.
No, that's not fair. If we can't give it, yeah.
And we can't refund that money, so I
We
think,
would have to frickin' go forward from this point forward.
and, I obviously agree with what these folks are saying on how we got to the position that we are with a $400 fee. It was the council fighting over $40,000. The administration sat in a department head meeting, went through the process, and they come up with these numbers, and we approved it. But at the end of the day, I think they had a lot of information and a lot of discussion of what goes into this that we didn't have. We didn't get into that detail. And I think if the council wants to change it, we need to have those discussions and go through this list and see how much does it cost for staff to go through and do this whole process and make that. And I think the administration did that, but we didn't request that documentation.
Well, I think there was also a problem too in that the stakeholders outside of the administration weren't brought in. Like these folks here were not asked to comment on it. They didn't get a chance to weigh in before we changed it, and I think that was a problem right there.
I'm not in favor of changing it midstream. But that's my opinion.
No, I'm not in favor of it either, but I am in favor of coming back next year and changing the fee schedule. Before they start.
Twyla, when do your mass gathering permits start to come in?
Each mass gathering is issued for the year,
Mhm.
beginning on the date you approve it. They don't all expire like like the vitulers license first or something.
Do you have a time of year that you have more than others?
I think the suggestion to do it in January probably is a good and valid one.
Do it for a calendar year.
You do it before the summer months begin and before people begin to renew them. I think everybody has theirs except him for this year.
And January, obviously it'll be up to the counselors that are sitting here in January to do it, but I think January is a good time because you know, the council can switch out and have a totally different perspective. You know, to give them that full calendar year to deal with the fee schedule.
You're reviewing capital items then too, aren't you, in January, February somehow there?
Typically.
Yep.
Yep.
So it's an annual process along with capital items maybe?
Okay. What do you think, Eric?
I'd like to see it changed next year. But
Well, next year, but I'm
next
talking
year,
about like right now.
No, I know we can't do it now. I understand that, but I'm okay with doing it next year.
You'll be on the council, so you can voice that opinion at that time.
Yes, you can.
And Mark?
Yeah, I think it's a big jump there, and I can see why people who are expected to pay that are a little shocked by
I
it to get,
completely agree.
you know,
Yep.
400% increase. I wouldn't be happy with that either.
I completely agree. So you're also in favor of not changing the fee structure now?
Can't do it.
Well, you can.
It wouldn't be,
You can,
Fair,
legally, you can change it, you just can't refund the people that have already paid it.
and that's not fair.
So,
That's not fair.
We can't do that.
Well, let Mr. Carville talk. I see he's over there with his hand.
as soon as the council's done, gonna entertain for the public.
Yeah, and as far as my earlier question about the difference between the 12-month, that 12-month maths gathering, it goes with location.
Location.
Yeah, a single vendor can't occupy an area larger than 144 square feet. So, obviously,
Bumps them into mass
yeah,
gathering.
that, yeah, that to me would bump it up to a mass gathering requirement. But yeah, that is kind of a steep price, but have to consider dropping down to 1 week too.
It was Mr. Olmsted that made those adjustments, right?
And Jessica Malloy.
Yeah,
Did all
we'll blame them, yeah.
Well, it was saying where it
No, not
was.
just them, I mean, the whole staff, I mean, they all sat in there and did it, we ultimately approved it though.
Yeah, we'd have to do it through yeah, the only way we can,
And if I remember correctly,
adjustments go through public hearing.
if I remember correctly, one of us questioned that steep increase, along with the construction ones that they changed, because those are also extremely steep, and we got some response.
Well, I remember one of the
haven't decided
construction ones, it was costing us more to do the paperwork than what they were paying.
yet.
I remember one of them. It was in
Yeah,
codes, I
that
think.
one was from like
I think that
25
one was
or
in
50 up
codes.
to over 500.
Yeah,
I mean,
that was something
a
to do in
steep one.
codes.
Yeah,
And we
and that was why.
changed for the water department, opening the roads, we changed that.
yep. But we've made a lot of changes, but we've done it at once, is the problem, you know, compared to now. So Greg, what's your opinion on this structure? You change it now? No fees? No.
We can't change it, well,
We could.
we could,
Could,
but
but
we'd have to
then-
go through a,
How many permits
Public
have been
hearing
issued
first.
already? How many mass gathering permits have been issued already?
We have the #1 flea market that has paid their $400. And we also have another one that's been visited and should be applying, which is at Extra Mart, where they're outdoor,
Right.
that little building. Got more than one vendor in there selling things.
Yep.
Okay.
Dale?
I agree. I mean, the wait seems fair.
Chris? Wait, okay. All right. So those counselors
not
that
bad.
will be here in
but that's
January,
new.
remember this discussion, and
Believe me, I will.
make sure you bring it up. All right, any other comments or questions from council before we open up to the public on this? None? Mr. Carville, would you like to address the council?
Yes. I understand that you increased it by this 400%, but I don't think you had the information, which I provided to you, what all these other markets are doing. And they're not even under mass gatherings. They were surprised. As far as the other market that has already paid, he's an indoor market that runs year-round. I don't. That should be justification right there to be less and where he's already paid. And something at the very end of this permit says something about adjusting the fees, if I remember right. At least a copy that I had. That they have, you people, I believe, have the option of adjusting that fee.
Yeah, that would be the fee schedule.
That is correct. It's under section 10-259 amendments. The town council shall have the further power to adjust the fees and license requirements of this article as appropriate after public hearing. That's what we were discussing. We'd have to go through a public hearing process, adjust the fee schedule, and that's what we don't want to do midstream. That's what we were just discussing. So you are right. We do have the authority to do it. Just as you heard from the council, we don't feel it's right to do it midstream.
What if, just
Hold on a
an-
second. I want to hear everything else Mr. Carville has to say.
I guess I will respond, maybe wait and
I
see
have
what,
one question. How long of a period are you open every year?
about 6 months.
6 months.
Half the time that an indoor market is.
That would be something to
And
consider
also-
also, because there is no option on here for a 6-month
In
license.
the last 2 Sundays, for example, I wasn't open because of the weather.
just, and I mean, going back to what we talked about, if we had the public hearing, there's only one that's actually paid the $400, right? If you had the public hearing, you could notify that person that's paid it, so they can come to the public hearing. They could voice their opinion, but he's making a good point. They've got a year-round flea market. They may not have an issue with paying more, and knowing that the next year that it'll be knocked out anyway. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know.
You're not yet. I won't be here.
Mr. Carville,
Yes,
how long have you had the flea market open?
30 years,
30 years.
sorry.
The boss speaks.
She must do your books.
Yes,
Kind of annual revenue you get off from that from an average of 30 years.
she'd have to answer
Do you have
that.
to answer that question?
Move on to public hearing.
I'm not in favor of it. You, I won't vote for it.
I would support a public hearing and changing it as soon as we can. I don't think that it was justified to jump it up to 400 in the beginning. So I'd support you.
I think we'd have to notify the one that's paid to be there, so that they'd have the chance to
Yeah.
voice their opinion.
Well, we could also do the term, change the term, add a 6-month license in there.
Mm-hmm.
That might be a better choice rather than,
Or what some of them do, they have indoor markets,
And
outdoor
outdoor,
markets.
yeah.
See you back there, Larry. You got something to say?
Not on the markets. On the marijuana.
You don't get free samples.
Oh, jeez, I'm gross. All right. So I haven't heard a majority to go to a change the fee structure, so. Yes, please.
Barry Morgan Alexander, Lisbon. If I might suggest, we have a problem here of semantics, where it says math gathering or flea markets. I would suggest that you put together a fee schedule for flea markets specifically and not in any way connected to mass gathering. I've been going to that flea market since I came to town almost 12 years ago. There's never been enough people in that place at one time to constitute a mass gathering. I submit it's a semantic situation, change the fee schedule, and it'll all come out. However, seeing someone has actually paid under the current schedule, and the law forbids us to give it back, the Constitution says everyone has to be treated equally under the law. As much as I'd love to see him get a break on this, from my knowledge of business law, I don't see how you can do it.
Thank you. Mr. Fillmore?
Are we closing that? Can I bring up?
Yeah.
marijuana?
Yep.
Either or.
Where's
Larry.
the blue, hold on, where's the blue shirt?
It wasn't appropriate tonight.
Oh.
This one is appropriate tonight.
Okay. All right.
Okay? Larry Fillmore from Lisbon. On the marijuana issue. If we're going to do something, we have to include the caregivers portion of it also. Let's don't make the motion or do half of it without doing the other half, because you're going to have to go back and do
Right.
the other half.
Yep.
So there was no discussion tonight about caregivers. And the gentleman that was here who wanted to speak on it, he left because it wasn't addressed. Okay? I think that we ought to consider the caregivers in the discussion that you have with the marijuana dispensary versus caregivers, and include it all in the ordinance, whatever you write, okay, and do. The second thing is, there should never, ever, ever be a referendum question that is not binding. Any question you put on the ballot should be binding. Now, I have a solution for you. We're going to get our lovely tax bills before November. You can put a survey out there. Survey says that would not be binding. But if you put a question on the ballot, that should always, always be binding if you're going to ask the people. Don't waste their time if you don't.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I think you're the one, Ms. Paradise. You have anything? All right. I'll just conclude with, I do agree with you folks that that is a steep increase, and too bad it wasn't caught. I do agree with that. I just don't agree with changing this midstream. If I am sitting on in this seat in January, I will be pushing for it to be changed because that will be the beginning of the council's year sitting together. But I'm not in favor of changing it midstream. But I do agree with you that it is a steep increase, and unfortunately that administration is no longer here to explain to us why they produce a number of such. Any other councilor have anything to close out with?
No.
All right. And we will adjourn the workshop as long as there's no objection. Workshop adjourned. Thank you.
Larry.
You don't think that was a good idea?
It's not part of what we were talking about. That's why we didn't include it. You're correct. You have a very good point. But it wasn't part of the ordinance.